Hello there. So today I want to tell you about a beautiful story that I came across. Now, the story is that Colombia, the country in Southern America, has a black female president or deputy president for that matter. So, otherwise known as the vice president of Colombia, is a woman of African descent. And in her own words, she said that having black women and black men being elected to the top office in that country is to her racial justice. That is what she said. Now, it's a beautiful story because Colombia today has about 5.5 to 6 million black people, purely African Colombians, not mixed, not racially mixed, but those who identify as pure African. That is 6 million people, making about 10 to 11% of the 52 million Colombians. The other thing you need to note is that in Colombia, there's no the kind of racism we usually see in the United States or in Brazil. In Colombia, black people are respected. The only issue has always been that they never get elected to the top offices. But that is changing, as you have seen, or I'm going to show you, is that the vice president of that country, the person who ensured that her coalition won the votes, was a black woman from a black neighborhood. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of Colombia in a very short discussion. But before I do that, I had made a video previously categorizing the top 20 countries outside Africa with the largest black population. And Colombia was, I think, position 6. And I remember that time a lot of people were not believing that we have close to 6 million pure African blacks in Colombia. The history of black people in Colombia is so vast and huge that I can't even cover it in one video or even two. But I'm going to summarize it. Is that once Christopher Columbus discovered the New World, now there was this discussion from Europe to find gold in this new world. So Spanish people started arriving in the northern part of South America, eager to extract gold and other precious stones indigenous to that region. And during the primary stage of the conquest, Spanish officials relied on the encomienda system, which was basically a system to recruit the local indigenous Indian population to work as laborers in exchange for what? In exchange for the benefits of Christian indoctrination. That's what it was. But it didn't take long, and these indigenous populations started dying because, unlike their African counterparts, these were not immune to the old world diseases such as smallpox and measles. Estimates suggest that as much as 95% of the indigenous population died as a result of this European conquest. I think you know that from history. So the Spanish officials had no other alternative but to turn on the African continent. And they came to West Central Africa, particularly Congo and Angola. They got these Africans from the Bantu community who are strong, and they could serve as labor for the mining operation in Colombia. So they took these bozares, because that's what they were calling them. And the word bozares comes from the fact that these Africans spoke a pidgin which was a Spanish language mixed with the Kikongo words. So Spanish Kikongo is bozares, and that's what they called them. And they kept going back to the African continent and bringing a lot of these bozares to work in the mines. It didn't take long for these initial bozares, these Congolese people who arrived in Colombia between 1535 to 1580. And they started, rebelling, uprising, and revolts, which they did frequently. And in the process, they founded the first independent African communities, also known as the Parakis in the Americas. So every time the Spanish would go back to Africa and bring over these laborers, it never took long for them to revolt. There were several and numerous revolts in that country from 1545. There's another one in 1555, 1556 all the way to 1598. Numerous revolts that involved the complete destruction of several mining sites and the conquest of white inhabited areas, also kidnapping and other construction destruction. So it continued to a point that they were called the runaway communities, and the elite, the Spanish elite, then agreed to a treaty to allow these Africans to live independent, to have their own independent regions. So they were called the Independent African Authoritative Zones, which were these parakis. And that's why today you find some regions of like the San Basilio region and northwestern Colombia. You find a lot of black Africans in that territory. A lot of them, as a matter of fact, you find some coastal cities there, 90% of the population being black people. So that's how it came to be. And the current vice president comes from one of those territories. She comes from a rich African heritage and culture territory in Colombia, and she rose to that being famous as an activist because she was trying to fight for environment, fighting against business people who come to the forests in Colombia to cut down the trees and try to do gold mining, and doing so they pollute the environment, they pollute the rivers, and that's why as a matter of fact she almost got killed doing her activism. Back in 2020 she survived an assassination attempt. So that's the vice president we are talking about, Mina. They call her Mina. And the other reason I'm talking about her and why the story fascinated me when I read it is because she's coming to Africa. So starting next month, she's coming to Africa on a tour to meet several African presidents. I've heard that she's coming to Kenya, and I don't have information about the other countries that she's going to visit. But it's a very good story that black people and African understand that Colombia is a third African. So it's more almost an African country to us.